You know, it's been a while since I made a video on a FNAF fan game. I wondered which one I should talk about next. Hey, would you look at that? Let's talk about the joy of creation. The Joy of Creation is arguably one of the most beloved FNAF fan games of all time, first being released as a demo by Nixon on November 29th, 2015. Was it any good? Well, not really. Yeah, I think it's safe to say retrospectively that The Joy of Creation didn't have the best start in the world, as the standards for what was considered good and what was considered bad changed over the years. Simply the fact that it looked better than this wasn't going to cut it anymore. Thankfully though, this demo was not all that we received as far as The Joy of Creation goes. No, in fact, we received 3 more games in the series, with the 4th fanverse game surely coming to us in the not-so-distant future. And today, I'm gonna talk about them. If you've been on the channel before, welcome back. If not, hello. My name is Minaxa, and today we're going to explore the redemption of the Joy of Creation. But before we get to the rest of the video, have you ever been so busy, either through school or work or playing games, that you've just skipped entire meals? Then you should be interested in today's sponsor, Control. Control is a company that makes meal replacement shakes, cookies, and protein bars. Their mission is to make convenient and still healthy foods that taste great. Instead of relying on junk food or skipping meals altogether, you can instead have a nutritious and easy-to-make meal replacement shake. There's 9 different flavors, including cookies and cream, cinnamon toast, banana split, and more. And if shakes aren't your style, then why not try a cookie? They've got chocolate chunk and cookies and cream options. If you use my code minaxa or the link below, not only will you be supporting me, but you'll be supporting yourself by giving your body the nutrients that it needs. You can also find Control products at your local GNC, or visit drinkcontrol.com with the link below, or use my code. The first entry in the Joy of Creation series was released on November 29th, 2015, like I said earlier. But to even call it an entry in the series is a bit of a stretch, because in reality it's just a short demo. If you can't tell, more often than not, FNAF fan games are heavily influenced by whatever official FNAF game was out at the time, and The Joy of Creation was no different, with its evident inspiration from Five Nights at Freddy's 4. Though, I think it is worth mentioning that it was also pretty inspired by another horror game that was popular around the time, Boogeyman. If you're familiar with that game, you know that it would continue to be a pretty big inspiration for the general gameplay design of The Joy of Creation going forward. As for the actual gameplay of this demo, well, it's about as basic as it gets. You sit at a desk in a room with a closet, a dresser, a window, and a door. Each of these spots has a designated threat, and to get them to go away, all you have to do is shine your light at them. Freddy comes from the front closet, Chica from the dresser, Foxy from the window, and Bonnie from the hall door. The main strategy is just to spin around in a circle, flashing your light, and you can only spin in one direction. As far as gameplay depth goes, that's the extent of it. The night doesn't even technically have any sort of ending. The timer in the corner suggests that it's an endurance test of how long you can spin in a circle until you get dizzy. Once you inevitably fail, the game just crashes on you.
I wasn't ready! I didn't know! I didn't know that I just needed to keep swiveling on.
The actual environment is alright, I guess. Visually, it's nothing too interesting, but at the time, the bar for FNAF fan games was pretty much in hell. So the fact that it even had proper 3D lighting since it was made in Unreal was enough to make most people happy. Despite saying all that, one thing I can definitely appreciate is the animations of the animatronics as you catch them attempting to make their way towards you. I think they look pretty cool. Nixon had a really clear vision of exactly the type of horror that he wanted to convey to the player, and I think it works really well, despite the roughness of this first demo that was actually only made in 4 days. Apparently, this demo game was meant to take place in the FNAF universe. In terms of the actual phone call that plays in-game, someone calls you about how the withered animatronics that you have are kind of fucked up and that they need to make new ones, which coincides with the lore of FNAF 2 to an extent, and you're also referred to as Scott, but apparently this wasn't supposed to be Scott Cawthon, it was just a coincidence. Apparently, he said shortly after the release of the demo that he'd be remaking the game from the ground up. He'd then say that the game was cancelled altogether, and then a few months later, he made a poll asking his community if the game should be revived. Thankfully, hundreds of people voted in favor of the game's continuation, because this successful poll would result in possibly the most recognizable version of the game, The Joy of Creation Reborn. In May of the following year, Nixon would release his newest installment in the Joy of Creation series. As you can tell, the game has had a massive graphical overhaul, and looks a lot better than it did before. It's not just the visuals that have improved though, because the gameplay has too. This time, the game gives you an option to play with each of the 4 ignited animatronics individually in a unique fetch quest scenario. I'm gonna go ahead and talk about each of these challenges in the order that they appear. Freddy's challenge places you on the ground level of a house arranged in such a way that it becomes like a maze. You're given 60 seconds to find 5 objects whose positions change with every attempt, as Freddy slowly wanders the area. It sounds pretty simple, but in practice the time limit is actually rather constrictive. To top it all off, each animatronic interaction in this game is nothing short of terrifying. You can hear Freddy stomping loudly throughout the house, and see the bright light from his glowing eyes around corners when he's getting near. In order to know that he's seen you, you don't even need to look back. All you need to do is listen for the thumping of his feet getting faster and closer and louder until... Yeah, I think Nixon struck a gold mine here. Bonnie's challenge is similar, instead taking place in the house's basement, but with the same fetch quest gameplay. 5 objects, 60 seconds. Bonnie's behavior is similar to Freddy's, but significantly more punishing as he is quite a bit faster if he sees you. If he does catch you, he gives you a good hard smack in the face, which is probably the most iconic jump scare in this entire series. Aside from that, Bonnie's gameplay segment is pretty much the same. The goal in Foxy's challenge is also to obtain 5 objects, but instead of 60 seconds, you're given 90. The reason why is that rather than just being an even harder version of Bonnie like the pattern would suggest, his mechanics are completely different. For one, when you enter the attic, he starts right in front of you and slowly makes his way towards you. When his eyes glow white and he starts to sprint towards you, that's when you need to flash the light in his face to temporarily stun him, though the window is not that large if you want to make sure you don't get stuck somewhere. The problem with this, though, is that if you shine your light at the wrong time, his eyes will instead glow red, and he'll sprint towards you at full speed, killing you instantly with a hook slash. The reason why Foxy in particular is so terrifying is because he's always slowly sneaking up on you throughout the entire level. He doesn't wander like the other animatronics. You also don't have any idea when he'll decide to change his mind and give chase, making for some excellently done, snappy, and reaction-based gameplay. Finally, we have Chica, whose challenge deviates entirely from the other 3 animatronics. Rather than being on a floor of the house, this takes place in a much larger forest map outside. The time you're given is lengthened dramatically to 5 minutes, which was originally 3, and the amount of collectibles is doubled to 10 pages. Just from looking at it, I'm sure you can tell this section has Slender vibes. Not only is the environment similar to what you'd expect from a Slender game, but Chica's behavior is as well. When the player is facing away from her, she'll pretty quickly advance towards them. However, turning around to look at her briefly will cause her to pause. If you look at her for too long, she'll start charging at you and kill you anyways, which is like the staticky thing that Slender does. Unlike the previous challenges, the placement of the collectibles isn't random, which is probably to make up for the added difficulty of having to get twice as many. As a fun Easter egg, many of the drawings on the pages you collect are references to Nixon's other games, such as Those Nights at Rachel's and Those Nights at Fredbear's. There's also an endless mode for every challenge that switches it, so rather than collecting stuff, you just survive for as long as possible, kind of like the original Joy of Creation game. Once you complete every challenge, you gain access to a secret Easter egg in the Extras menu. This secret ending is really strange, containing two hallucination animatronics called Phantasmagoric Ignited Foxy and Phantasmagoric Ignited Freddy. Okay, but that's all Joy of Creation Reborn really has to offer. You may have noticed that this time around, there wasn't really any lore. Despite taking place in different parts of seemingly the same house, the different challenges had little coherence with each other. Don't you worry though, there's gonna be time for lore, but before that we need to talk about Halloween Edition. On October 31st, 2016, Nixon released the Joy of Creation Halloween Edition. This time around, the game takes place in Fazbear's Fright, and the threat is Ignited Springtrap, who does not appear anywhere else in any of the other games. The gameplay is similar to the free roam style from Reborn, but this time you get to access a camera system through a phone that the player carries in their right hand. Speaking of the phone, this game actually has a phone call, as well as voice acting for the player and the person calling you. Basically, the phone call can be summed up as some dude telling you to destroy Fazbear's Fright by finding a hammer to break some gas valves and then setting it all on fire. It's sort of like the fetch quest gameplay from Reborn, but a little more interesting. You could also argue that it's a little more annoying since you need to find the hammer before you can even start breaking the 6 valves, and then you need to find a lighter to actually finish it off. Like in FNAF 3, you can play sounds on the cameras to distract Springtrap, which is pretty useful. If you couldn't tell, even though it was just a short Halloween treat for his fans, Nixon used this game as an opportunity to take his skills to the next level. The use of vibrant colored lighting is something that I really like specifically because you all know I'm a sucker for good art direction, but it actually plays into the gameplay as well. The color red is used to highlight things of importance, with Springtrap's eyes and the pipes that you're meant to break being lit with a bright red light. This helps to distinguish what's important in the dark environment, which otherwise has mostly yellow, green, and blue lighting, and helps to make the collecting process a bit less tedious than it might have otherwise been. It's just good game design. Once you're actually done with all of the tasks you've been given, the ending cutscene shows the player struggling to escape the burning building before being caught and choked out by Springtrap. If he's going down, you're going down with him. Now it's time for the moment I'm sure you've all been waiting for. After 2 years of polishing his skills, Nixon was finally ready to make his magnum opus. After finishing Reborn, he started development on Story Mode on September 3rd, 2016. He was doubtful that the game would be successful for some reason, and his initial demos were buggy as hell. Apparently, it was actually Fiznom that convinced him to stop uploading demos and just focus on developing the game to completion, and that's exactly what he did. Fast forwarding to April 2017, Nixon would start uploading teaser trailers that showcased just how much better this game would be than anything he had ever done before, culminating in a release on July 17th, 2017. Right away, the game opens with a fully voice-acted cutscene, and you seem to take on the role of a person named Nick returning to their childhood home. This game follows a similar principle to Reborn in the sense that the title screen leads you to individual gameplay experiences. In this game, they're labeled as memories. Alright, let's start off with the first memory, bedroom. It starts with a cutscene from a younger Nick's perspective, where a stranger named Michael enters his house near sunset and seems to forget how he even got there in the first place. The father, being a good man, decides to let him stay in the house, and Nick remarks that he remembers Michael being a decent man, but he was so young that one of his only memories that remains of Michael was from one stormy night where he woke up to a phone call from him. This phone call acts as the tutorial for the first memory, and you play as a very young Nick stuck inside of his crib with animatronics trying to catch him. Freddy is the most aggressive of them, approaching from the window fairly often and needing the curtains shut for him to go away. If he's ignored for too long, he'll open the window and eventually jump scare you. Bonnie will knock on the door across from you, which is from the hall, 3 times and barges in to try and catch you with your light on. If you're not sitting and instead standing up in the crib, or if your light is on, he'll jump scare you. Sometimes he knocks twice rather than 3 times as a feint to make you more anxious, which can be very annoying if you have other threats to deal with. Foxy, unlike the previous 2, requires conditions to be a threat in the first place. Freddy must have attacked twice and Bonnie and Chica at least once. When you hear scraping under the crib, it serves as a warning that he'll be attacking soon. However, once his hook is reaching over the edge, that's when you need to lay down and pretend to sleep until you hear him going away. Chica also has conditions for appearing, though they are a bit more lax than Foxy's. Freddy simply needs to have attacked twice. She emerges from the closet on a sound cue, and the player must sit in the crib but not pretend to sleep, as you would with Foxy. Otherwise, she will jump scare and stun you rather than completely ending your game. Except for under one circumstance, because there's a certain game mechanic that I have left out of the explanation, and that's sanity. If you look at the device across from you at the end of the room, you can see that it'll always be flashing a color, and this color actually coincides with the state of your sanity. Green is good, yellow and orange are bad, and red is the worst. Sleeping unnecessarily and looking straight at an animatronic will slowly decrease your sanity. Unlike what you might expect, although turning on the lamp next to you will maintain your current sanity level, there's no mechanic that allows the sanity level to go down. Once it reaches orange levels, you'll start seeing visual distortion, hearing sounds that aren't really there, and the player's vision will slowly start to shake and your heartbeat will rise. Then, at a certain threshold, animatronic hallucinations will start, and staying under that red level of sanity for too long will cause Golden Freddy to end your game. To make matters worse, at 5 AM, your sanity will automatically be put into the red level regardless of how well you managed it for the first 5 hours. Upon completion of the night, you're treated to an article, which is talking about Five Nights at Freddy's as an actual game in universe. For elaboration on what that means, you'll just have to stick around and find out. The next memory, Living Room, opens with a cutscene of Scott and his wife being concerned that a stranger is sleeping in their home, and they decide to spend the night in the living room. Scott goes off to check on one last thing beforehand, and the living room descends into a nightmare with his wife Val trapped having to defend against the animatronics. Like last time, Michael calls the phone to act as a guide for the gameplay, but this time he says that it's his fault that these things are happening. And he even calls Scott by his name, which his wife remarks that he shouldn't even have known what his name was because he never said it. Michael doesn't respond to this accusation though, and the gameplay begins. The living room TV turns into a camera system that monitors Freddy and Foxy, and there's a button that can be used to pause one of their movements so that they don't show up at the same time. The reason why this is important is because you have to hide behind the door that they'll open to see if you're there, which is impossible to do if they both show up. The center doors are where Bonnie comes from. By looking through the keyhole, you can identify how close Bonnie is to you, and then you have to hide behind the center doors, meaning that you're exposed to whatever door ends up being behind you. Chica's purpose in this memory is to punish the player for sitting on the couch and using the TV for too long. If you're there for 10 seconds, she'll stun the player like she did the previous night. Although a sanity stat does not exist in this memory, the game still changes at 5 AM, and Chica will end your night from an attack, like in the previous memory. Also like the previous memory, a special game over cutscene will play if you die past 5 AM, which depicts an animatronic walking down a hall. their vision a red hue. In case you couldn't tell at this point, every single night in this game is going to be a completely different resource management based gameplay loop. Unlike most Five Nights at Freddy's games that have ramping difficulty but similar mechanics for each night, it's gonna be completely different. And it can't be overstated how much of an interesting idea this is and how much effort must have gone into making this game and balancing the mechanics of every single night. It's honestly genius. Going back to the living room specifically, another aspect of the design that I enjoy is that the glowing eyes of the ignited animatronics show their field of vision when they open the doors as an indicator for where the player cannot be standing. I think it's definitely good game design practice to try to make your gameplay as intuitive as possible even if you have a detailed explanation. Once you finally complete this night, you're shown another news article, this time talking about paranormal activity in the woods, which sparked a full investigation as the area surrounding the newspaper slowly burns. Could this be foreshadowing? Next up is The Office memory. It opens with a cutscene of Nick talking about how he thought what happened to him when he was a kid was just a bad dream, which is the gameplay from the first memory he's referring to. Even though he was scared, he was silent the whole time. Then it cuts to Scott's perspective, hearing a scream from Nick's room. When Scott actually checks on the room, though, it's been replaced with an empty void. When he turns around, there's now a giant looming hallway. He tries to convince himself it's all just a dream, but the door in front of him opens to reveal Freddy, his own creation, staring back at him. As Freddy starts to close in and give chase, Scott runs. The impossible labyrinth his house has been turned into eerily resembles Freddy's challenge from Reborn. After he gets away, he stumbles across his office, which also resembles something from the Joy of Creation's past, the original demo. After picking up a note that is supposedly from his kids and his trusty flashlight, the gameplay begins, along with Scott's nightmare. This time, Michael is not the person who gives the explanation, but rather Scott himself, recording the tendencies of the animatronics as a self-reminder in case he were to, for whatever reason, forget. The sun has never risen, the clocks have never passed any time. He's stuck in an infinite purgatory of his own creations. You don't get the full explanation for the animatronics right away. Rather, more recordings defining the way they work will show up periodically at certain landmarks throughout the night, and this coincides for when the respective animatronic that's being explained will actually start to show up. Freddy sits outside one of the doorways to the office and doesn't actually make any deliberate action. The problem with him, though, is that you have to flash your light at him at least 11 times before getting to 5 AM. It's a win condition. If you fail to meet the goal, the power turns off at 6 AM and Freddy will enter through the center doors, playing an orchestral rendition of the Toreador March and eventually jump-scaring you. Foxy waits outside of an entrance, making his presence known with a knock and sometimes a growl. The only way to make him go away is by watching him on the camera. The problem with this is that he'll jump scare you if you instead check the entrance by walking up to it and physically looking at it, which is inconvenient because of the need to search for Freddy and also because of Chica's mechanics. Chica will slowly start to writhe into your office through a black stain in the wall, only being dissuaded if the 3 phantom cupcakes hidden in various places in and around the office are located in time. She functions similarly to Freddy from FNAF 4, with the cupcakes even making the same sounds as the frettles to alert you as to where they might be. The problem with the cupcakes, though, is that they can be outside of the office, which means you might encounter Foxy incorrectly whilst trying to look for them. Thankfully, to prevent this from being too unfair, Chica will actually stop advancing if you make direct eye contact with her, which can buy you some time. If you take too long, though, she'll free herself from the confines of the wall and run towards you, jump-scaring you and ending your night rather than just stunning you like the previous 2 memories. Finally, around 3 AM, Bonnie will start attacking. He's essentially the opposite of Foxy. He doesn't like being looked at on the cameras. Rather than straight up killing you though, he'll punch the camera that you're looking at him from and disable it for the remainder of the night. This might sound pretty bad, but the game has a failsafe put into place that makes it so Foxy can't show up on a camera that's broken anymore. So really, purposefully taking out one camera, or maybe even two, could be a valid strategy. If he breaks all three cameras though, it makes knowing where Foxy is entirely up to a sound cue-based guessing game, and you definitely should try to avoid that. Like the previous memories, the game also gets a little disorienting at 5 AM. Throughout this memory, it's possible to occasionally stumble across ignited Golden Freddy, who seems to be the topic of these secret cutscenes and all of this stuff that happens at 5 AM in every memory. This time it shows a time loop on an analog clock, reaching 6 AM and infinitely repeating as the room it's in slowly deteriorates. Drawings of Five Nights at Freddy's characters appear on the wall, and the room slowly becomes engulfed in flames. There's definitely something to do with fire going on here. For the fourth memory, we follow Scott once again, who delves into the house's basement after successfully escaping the office. Like before, it starts with narration from Nick, and he says that after that night, everyone forgot about Five Nights at Freddy's, the game franchise that his dad created. When Scott gets to the basement searching for his kids who left behind the office note, he finds it empty. The computer monitor on the other side of the room shows a bunch of eyes, and Scott starts to angrily proclaim that these evil spirits haunting his family aren't the characters he created, and they're just using their appearances to terrorize them. After he asks them who they really are, they say, "Your creation," before he gets knocked out, and the player wakes up in a totally transformed basement environment. Of all the memories, this one is arguably the most complicated. The night is split into 6 phases, with each having a different goal. Rather than being pitted against the main animatronics, you're instead tasked with fighting against 4 endoskeletons known as the Fallen, as you complete your tasks. In Phase 1, the player is greeted by a large array of monitors that will display messages throughout the memory. After the player explores for a bit and attempts to leave through the stairs, they'll realize that they're trapped and must go back down the stairs, only to find a stationary endoskeleton now sitting in the middle of the room. If you approach it too closely, it will kill you instantly. In order to progress to the next phase, you must return to the bathroom and then exit again into the main basement room. The big red number near the monitors to the top left will count down every time a phase has been completed. Phase 2 begins with the monitors showcasing a number of objects that need to be recovered and thrown into the furnace. The room is now decorated with furniture and posters resembling what you'd expect to see in a party room from Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. This time around, there are 2 endoskeletons to worry about, Endo C and Endo B. Endo C is the one from the previous phase, and it belongs to Chica. She's pretty predictable, only acting immediately after an item is found, and appearing in certain parts of the room to stall the player's progress. Endo B, which belongs to Bonnie, will appear randomly, foreshadowed by hallucinations and the player becoming increasingly frantic. In order to solve this problem, the player has to go back to the bathroom to reset the process. Once all of the items are collected and burned, the player can return to the bathroom and begin the next phase. Phase 3 involves Endo B, which belongs to Freddy. The endoskeleton only moves when you're not looking at it, which is pretty terrifying since you need to be looking at certain parts of the room to find a code to progress through the level. The actual puzzles that you need to solve are relatively straightforward, which was probably an intentional design choice to balance the stress of dealing with what's essentially a weeping angel. Once you grab the key from the stairs and return to the bathroom, you can move on to what's probably the weirdest of all the phases. Phase 4 consists of nothing but a long hallway, and all you really have to do is walk forward and get to the door on the other side. It's probably the easiest of all the phases, but also the most stressful. The threat here is Endo F, which belongs to Foxy. Once you get about halfway down the hall, a hallucination will flash the words on screen, "Keep going," and "Don't look back." Regardless of whether or not you look back right away, as you approach the exit, you'll hear footsteps rapidly approaching. If you look back too early, though, this will happen instead. Phase 5 is like Phase 3 on steroids. There's 2 endos that will move when you're not looking, and eventually 2 more that are standing in place as roadblocks. Once you finally make it up the stairs and use the key obtained in Phase 3, you finally unlock the door to the rest of the house. But that door disappears. Making your way back down the stairs, everything in the room has vanished. If you die in this phase, text displays that says, "Open the way, Michael," which confirms that you're not playing as Scott, but rather Michael, the man who was let into their house. Michael previously said that he was responsible for what happened when he was talking to Val, and it seems like he meant it quite literally. What are Michael's intentions, really? Finally, we end with Phase 6. The room is back to the way it was before. There's no wall of monitors, no new rooms, no enemies, no threats. The computer displays behind the scenes pictures from the actual Scott Cawthon. From there, you make your way back up the stairs, and the basement memory ends. The newspaper clipping displayed describes accounts of strange doppelganger apparitions, known as evil twins. At long last, we've arrived at the 5th and final memory. The attic contains a culmination of gameplay elements introduced throughout the games thus far, including things you'd expect from a more generic Five Nights at Freddy's style gameplay loop. Per usual, it opens with a cutscene. This takes place after Michael knocks Scott out in the basement and he restrains him in the attic. Scott asks Michael why he's done this to his family. They're good people and didn't do anything wrong. Michael just says that it's the way that it has to be. He thanks Scott for allowing him to see the world through his creations. Michael Schmidt and the animatronics, that is. The Ignited have begun to lose their shape. By using the furnace, Michael has allowed them to come together to form a greater entity known as Creation. With that, the house slowly starts to burn from the bottom up, and Creation's roar bellows through the home, signaling the beginning of Scott Cawthon's final memory. When the game actually begins, you have the camera system in front of you that shows various rooms from other parts of the game. Creation will slowly make his way up from the basement to the attic, breaking down obstacles along the way. Behind you are 2 doors from which all 4 of the Fallen can enter. You'll either spot them on the camera by flipping the switch to the left to use the attic view, or hear them running up to one of the 2 doors. Golden Freddy can occasionally appear behind you as a hallucination, which ends your game if you stare for too long. The only way to successfully clear this memory is kind of like The Office, where you have to flash Golden Freddy on the cameras 12 times. But obviously this needs to be used at the right moment, since Creation is also a threat to handle that requires a flash to be put back in his progress. Although there is no timer on the fire, which simply progresses based on how many times Golden Freddy has been flashed, Creation has 3 faces on every camera that progress once every 30 seconds. However, if the room he's in is on fire, he will progress faster. If he actually manages to break the final barrier and make his way from the office through the trapdoor into the attic, this terrifying animation will play and he will kill Scott before the house burning has the chance to. If you manage to win, though, you get one last newspaper. Man found dead in his own house. Then, the final scene. Scott frees himself from his restraints and starts dragging himself towards the exit. The fire is already engulfing the attic by this point. There's no way he can make it out alive. Michael speaks to Scott from the radio that he threw down earlier. Michael taunts Scott, saying that surviving until 6 AM and everything will be fine only works in his games. Scott begs Michael to let his family stay safe even if it means that he has to die. Michael appears in the attic, lifts Scott up by his neck, and takes him out. Then Michael, masquerading as Scott Cawthon, exits the house and tries to reassure his family that they're all safe now, and that's all that matters.
See, they're safe now, just as you wanted. Thank you for your cooperation, Scott Cawthon. I'll take care of everything from here.
After the events of the final memory, years later, Nick, one of Scott's children, would return to his family home. The home's landlord, Tobias, would call Nick to no response, only to find him dead, which is the tragic ending that the final newspaper conveys to us. As time went by following the game's release, the Joy of Creation story mode would garner a reputation in the Five Nights at Freddy's community as one of, if not the best, FNAF fangame of all time. Unfortunately, as Nixon went on to work on an original game, Dark Deception, nobody really expected anything else from the Joy of Creation, and the hype slowly dwindled until the Joy of Creation was just a fond memory. That is, of course, until the Fanverse initiative was announced, which is where we all learned about the Ignited Collection. The goal of the Ignited Collection is to completely remake all 3 main Joy of Creation games from the ground up, including the original, Reborn, and Story Mode. The games will have polished mechanics, completely redone models, and overall just be even better than they were before. You might be wondering, exactly how much better will the Ignited Collection be than its counterparts? Well, let me just show you. If you compare what we just saw to the original Office Memory gameplay, the difference is truly night and day. Even though it already looked good, at this point Ignited Collection could pass as a AAA game, and it'll be treated as such too. Since the Ignited Collection is part of the Fanverse, it'll definitely be a paid game with PC and console releases. From what was originally a mediocre demo made in 4 days with mind-numbing gameplay, to what will inevitably become the best FNAF fangame of all time, Nixon and the Joy of Creation have truly come full circle. And what a redemption it has been. And that concludes my annoying ramblings about the Joy of Creation. If you had a good time, it would mean the world if you subscribed for more content like this and turned on post notifications so you never miss a video. If you want to support me further, $5 channel members get early access to new videos, and you can also follow my socials and join the community Discord server. That being said, that's going to be all from me. I hope you enjoyed the video. Until next time.